All right, welcome back. Yes, indeed, Mr. Adeni Kunu joins us this morning virtually from beyond the shores of this country in the States. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on the program today.
Good morning, Chamberlain. It's a pleasure being here again.
Yeah,
and,
so...
as you said earlier, happy pre-independence. That's what you said.
I was asking myself, wait. I never even had time to process that. Happy pre-independence. Okay, there's during, there's post. What am I supposed to do? All the pre, during, post. Okay, well, this is the very week where, and they've started the law already. The ministers did speak to the nation on Friday about what they're doing, how they think that something is being done. This was after I think they had been given the marching orders anyways, because people thought, oh, could it be because there's supposed to be a cabinet reshuffle, so everybody has that marching order, go out there and speak. But you tell us, it's the 64th Independence Day celebration. So what comes to your memory when you even hear that? I mean, compared to the days previously. So how does that play out mentally for you?
Well, I think I'm grown enough to be able to speak about the country and the, very many documented experiences between the military and the civilian regimes that I've witnessed since I realized that I'm a citizen of this country. And whenever we talk about, the togetherness of a nation, we give consideration first to the reasons why we should say thank you. Many have died, but we're still grateful that as a country, we're still together. Because I can't imagine Nigeria having the number of refugees that people would normally have when there's an outbreak of war. So is there a reason to be grateful? I say first, yes, there's a reason to be grateful because we're still together as a country. Then another layer for me to be able to say thank you is that we've had about 25 years of unbroken democracy. That in itself is indicative of the kind of growth or the journey towards growth that we've made about a quarter of a century. But in the course of realizing all of these positives, would we have been better as a country with regard to the kind of pace that we give to the positive that we would have been able to account for? I can say yes. And those positives, we still have the capacity to exhibit, but are we really ready? Because when we talk about the leadership of a nation, oftentimes we do not give consideration to the kind of assessment we normally give to ourselves when we find ourselves within organizations where we work. So if I decide to use the key performance index approach to doing an assessment, and I've said all of the speeches and statements made by the people who perhaps have been working with the president for over a year, going to 2 now, may not be so much as something that I want to talk about because many will fall short. So let's first of all look at the primary ingredients that is expected of the average person, and that would be competence. Competence has 2 levels, Chamberlain. Competence with regard to the kind of education you get, that makes us give consideration to your primary consideration for a role. Then competence is also tested and confirmed by virtue of how you do with regard to your terms of reference. So we find out that in certain instances, the paper qualification of those that are members of the cabinet of the president can be applauded, but with regard to the deployment of those knowledge resources, as applied with, when it has to do with solving the problems of their respective ministries, I have to say that it is gross incompetence. And I think that that is where we will begin this conversation. Whilst we are happy to be together, while we applaud the fact that our democracy is not broken, but what about the key index? So because of that, I'd like to just raise an issue here with regard to key areas that may be important for us to chew upon in this conversation. Let's look at the cash cow of the country, and that is the petroleum sector of Nigeria. I do not know if you've observed that repeatedly, the likes of Kyari have actually taken a lot of Nigerians as idiots. I'm very sorry, but I have to choose that word. I'm not using it for anybody. I'm just describing how we appear to him, because he's communicated repeatedly to us about how the petroleum sector of the country will have some kind of reprieve. When this administration came to power, it was about 187. It moved from 187 to 700. Right now, the money paid per liter for petroleum product is about 1,000 plus. And that itself may be as much as 2,000 in some part of this country. So that is number one part of this consideration. So when I look at the competence level of Mele Kyari and how he has repeatedly insulted the intelligence of Nigerians, I say that that ministry falls short. Then at the same time, I want to call to question the fact that you have a sector that is critical to the nation's development, and you have the president who doubles as the Minister of Petroleum Resources, and we know that that is not his area of competence. So why first wouldn't you have somebody who has years upon his or her belt that has capacity to be able to do what has to be done? So for a Mele Kyari, in assessing, for instance, him particularly how he has driven the petroleum sector, then I think it's a null and null for me. That is my own position.
All right. So
then if you also
pardon me.
Yes, please.
Tomorrow, the president is expected to deliver another Independence Day address to Nigerians. So we're just going to take a look at some of what he said at the last Independence Day speech. So if I could just quote some parts of that address by the president on the 63rd Independence Day anniversary, which was on the 1st of October 2023. He says,
yes, please.
At my inauguration, I made important promises about how I will govern this great nation. Among those promises were pledges to reshape and modernize our economy and to secure the lives and liberty and property of the people. I said that bold reforms were necessary to place our nation on the path of prosperity and growth. On that occasion, I announced the end of fuel subsidy. I'm attuned to the hardship that have come. I have a heart that feels and eyes that see. I wish to explain to you why we must endure this trying moment. Those who sought to perpetuate the fuel subsidy and broken foreign exchange policies are people who will build their family mansion in the middle of a swamp. I am different. I am not a man to erect our national home on a foundation of mud. To endure, our home must be constructed on safe and pleasant ground. Fast forward to today.
Thank you.
How does that resonate from your perspective?
If you look at what he talked about, you're talking about the economy of the country and how that resonates. Between then and now, the Naira has been devalued further. For those who perhaps have consistently looked at the aspect of the foreign exchange dynamics, you'd agree with me that there was a particular period, I think that was about 4 or 5 months ago, where the president and people in his cabinet celebrated how the Nigerian currency made certain levels of improvement against the dollar. That was just for about 3 weeks, that the exchange rate came to as much as 800. But sooner had it gotten there than the amount itself came back to about, as of yesterday, I think it's about 1,600 and something in terms of the exchange rate to the dollar. Now, when you talk about the strength of the economy, you have to do the measurement of the strength of your currency before, now, and you do projections, because that is a key part of it. With regard to what you've given to me, Chamberlain, with respect to the economy of the country, it is obvious from the figure I talked about that the country's economy has actually shrunk with regard to the strength of the economy currency-wise. If you also look at the inflationary impact of the economy, between that same period, which was in 2023, and now when the president gave that Independence Day speech, you'd agree with me again, Chamberlain, that Nigerians and their capacity to have some monies that you describe as a take-home is obviously something they found very difficult to do. So that's another thing. So whenever we measure the economy, we do not just measure the economy based on perhaps the organized private sector or whatever is happening within the organized public sector. Let me use that word now. We look at how much of those things he has talked about How has this thing, or how many of those things have reflected in the pay power of the people? So you'd agree with me that whilst he talked about bold reforms, and I respect the position of the president regarding his intentions, but the practicability of what your intent has become on paper, or with regard to administering anything you have as your policy plan, I tell you, has not actually measured up. And that is why Nigerians are concerned. I actually read one of my friends, Kelechi Deka, and I have also studied the economies of nations with regard to some of the researches that I've done. No country in the world went so low that there is no single reprieve, even while they're reforming. As difficult as it could be, you can tell me that a country like Singapore went low many years ago, but it did not get to the point where they were practically strangulated in the name of wanting to ensure that the economy resurges. And that is an aspect for me that I believe the president has to look at. Economic reforms is fundamental, especially when you have an economy that is import dependent, and when you have an economy also where the basics of your expectations are not put on the paper. Now let's look at a lot of countries of the world. For instance, if you go to New York State, just New York State, or let me say New York City, the electricity generated in New York City alone, not the state, is more than the electricity generated in the entire Nigeria. One of the things that is very pivotal to any functional economy is the aspect of power, because you know that for any business you do, power is primary. Small-scale businesses, medium-scale enterprises, large-scale enterprises, you need power to run it. If you talk about economic reforms and you make us imagine that you expect things like foreign direct investment and you expect people to actually plow their money into your economy, what are the incentivization put in place? Apart from, for instance, you have things that we talk about, okay, tax incentives. What about what you as a country do to ensure that there's a lot of incentives with power? Don't forget that is economic reform. I wouldn't know if you want to take another part of that speech, because there's a portion of that speech that talks about security. And I'm going to also tell you the comparative analysis of what has taken place between that same 2023 and now with regard to the insecurity situation of the country. So if you permit me, you want me to veer into that. Between 2023 and now, you've had a sitting governor and a former governor accuse each other about being complicit with respect to the security or otherwise of the country. When Mr. Matawale was there, do not forget, and I need to remind us here, that if you talk about insecurity in the country, the northwest and the northeastern part of this country, especially as it relates to banditry, kidnapping, and all of the nefarious things being done, these things I'm talking about are prevalent to the extent that they have to give the leader of a kidnapper even a chieftaincy title in Zamfara State. Now, this back and forth brickbat that has been taking place between the former governor of Zamfara and the current governor of Zamfara is indicative of the many other things that are happening under the leadership of this administration that you'd expect the president to have taken decisive steps. Excuse me, on your channel's television in 2018, you had a naval officer who came on top. I think I'm trying to remember his name. That was August of 2018, I beg your pardon. He came on air and told us that the government has a lot of information in its possession regarding the people that are making a mess of Nigeria. And the same government over time has not been able to demonstrate that it has the guts to use all of the instrumentality of force to uproot those that are actually killing many Nigerians themselves. So you find out that between when that speech was given and now, the president of the country has in his possession over 400 names given to its administration by the previous administration about the people that are sponsoring terrorism in the country. And between then and now, he has given the speech. He has told us that he's committed to the security of the country. Yet you have over 400 names in your possession. The Kuche prison is another example, Chamberlain. What is the current situation with the other persons that they should? I know that they put a particular wanted list out with pictures, But between that time and now, what are the things that we've done with regard to the Kuje prison that was also attacked? So if we want to look back, we won't want to talk about what is going to tell us tomorrow. We'll talk about the things that the president should have actually taken care of with regard to security or otherwise in this country. Chamberlain, just imagine for a moment that some people came and overran your prison at the nation's capital. You don't have a single footage. You don't have a single thing that you probably, because you exchange fires, to have actually dealt with the people who attacked the prison. And it appears as if Nigerians are looking the other way. Chamberlain, I refuse to look the other way because certain things are obvious and people refuse to talk about it. So between 2023 and now, what has happened basically to those that were supposed to have, exchanged fires with those who attacked the Kuje prisons? What has happened to the officers on duty? What were the things we saw at Kuje prison that showed that truly it was not an organized overrunning of a national prison? That's another information for you here, Chamberlain. So when you look at speeches being given, we have to look at what has happened before the speech, during the speech, after the speech, and what is the disposition of the current leadership to taking care of that.
Very important questions that you've raised there, Mr. Kuno, and I believe that those are questions that mustn't be swept under the carpet. And I think that this issue of this controversy now prevailing between Bobrisky, VDM, etc.
Yes,
we want to believe that that issue will certainly make it to the fore again, because recently prisons, the correctional facilities have now come under scrutiny. I think quite a number of officers were excused from their duty post just last week through a statement released by the minister or the minister's office, that particular department. But you've raised a number of other important issues with regards to the economy. You've raised the issue of electricity. And interestingly, just looking at the front page of Vanguard newspapers this morning, the Minister of Power is speaking about how over 40% of Nigerians now enjoy 20 hours of electricity. I do not know. I'm reporting what's on the front page of the paper. But if you have to ask me, as a Nigerian, as somebody who's living in this country and who now has to pay through her nose for electricity because certain bans were introduced. I do not know if you were privy to the controversy that raised when we're told that in certain areas certain investments have been made, and they believe that they can supply at least 20 hours of electricity, 20 hours plus electricity to certain areas, and they believe that they need to pay the market price of electricity. So a number of people are now paying as much as 200 naira, if not more, per kilowatt hour, which was over 300% increase in electricity tariff, which a number of Nigerians are currently shouldering. Now, what the minister's statement means is that about 40% of Nigerians may perhaps now be on that band A area and may be paying that much. I think it's up to, we can conduct a poll to find out if they're actually getting value for money. But in the area where I live, I can say that, well, there's been some improvement in the area of electricity. The question is whether it is going to the productive sector, to the manufacturers. Are they also feeling that? That's the answer. That's the question I cannot give an answer to. Because that's the area that is really critical. We need electricity to facilitate production. We need electricity for manufacturing. So in that regard, would you say that you really have a very fair assessment of what is going on there?
Mark, let me tell you here, and I need to say this clearly, that I feel insulted, really, especially because I'm talking from the US. With every sense of humility, I've had the privilege of interacting with very wonderful minds here. And but for the kind of human being that God has made me, I think if I didn't have the privilege of a little bit of, let me be very euphemistic, if to say I knew finished primary school, I would not have been able to hold my own and hold it very strong when I'm talking to people about my country. I would have been a very poor example of the kind of quality that Nigeria gives. But we're grateful to God for his privileges. In the place where I live, Malkwe, I am not on band W or K or F or Z. There is no band that exists. When I step out of my door each morning, I switch off the power controls and my electricity remains intact. When we're talking about improving the kind of infrastructure we have, why is it difficult at times for people to accommodate the trends that are functional? Let's go back to the Goodluck Jonathan administration and the unbundling of the electricity sector. Something that is as critical as electricity was to be done, and nobody thought that it was important for us to actually hand over that sector to those who have capacity. Some of the people we know that are part of those who own the respective distribution companies, quite frankly, are those within the corridors of power, in alignment with some other people. And many of these people, for instance, do not even have an inkling about how the power sector works. As a matter of fact, I need to remind you that you should remember here that after the unbundling of the power sector, the federal government of Nigeria had to give money to the people that were supposed to come with their money to handle or take over the electricity units of the country, because I've never seen it anywhere. A private investor supposedly came into your electricity sector and said, we want to do business, we know how to handle it. And having unbundled and handed it over to them, you now took money again from those who perhaps might not have completely paid you for the unbundling, and you gave money to them again to start the business. So that is a kind of business system that I'm still trying to understand. That's one part. I do not understand how you could... Yes, you wanted to say something, please? Or do I continue?
Well, I actually just want to add a question to this, Mr. Kono, and that is to help us understand the difference and how we should be approaching this. There's a difference between the word leader and leadership. So most of the time when we talk about the leadership of a nation or a state or any environment, we're talking about not just one person. We're talking about a group of people. But then most of the time it will seem like the attention is always on one individual, the leader. So, and that can be deceptive because people would wonder, how come this fellow is not doing anything when in the reality, it's way beyond that individual, that particular individual. Every time one is talking about the federal government of Nigeria doing this or that, always forgetting that there are 36 states and officially 774 local governments and their chairmen and the governors and the states with their governors. So when we talk about the leadership of a nation, shouldn't we be looking at a whole set of people as opposed to just focusing on one person? Because without collaboration, we can't have the kind of leadership we want.
All right, let me remind you that there's a common saying, everything rises and falls on leadership. Now, if you check the great organizations of this world, let me take, for instance, let me take Microsoft, for instance. You'd agree with me that over the years, Bill Gates, who leads the light of the organization, despite having a lot of persons that work with him, has been able to reinvent the organization and reinvent himself as far as the technology sector of the world is concerned. Now, you cannot take away the fact that the body language, the policy direction, the determination, the acumen, the deliberateness of the person who is at the center of a particular administration is pivotal. If you check great democracies of the world, now I want to talk about civil rights activism in a country like the United States of America. When Martin Luther King led the march from, Selma to Montgomery in Alabama, you'd agree with me that there were other persons who marched with him. But what resonated there was the nonviolence principle that he enunciated and the fact that people were able to see him as the epitome of that, despite other person, and they followed suit. The president of the country is at the center of the leadership of the country, regardless of the PDP, APC, Labour dichotomies that we have. But do not also forget that within the past 25 years, we've had party members cross from one party to the other. It seems as if they are all in the same area and they can decide to choose nomenclatures over time. We have all other persons leading, but what is the body language of this country? Now, why do we refer, for instance, to the nationalists of this country? It's simply because they embody the kind of leadership, the kind of vision, the kind of mission that we should and hope to have. And that's why we refer to them. And it is key for us to understand that the person himself who leads will always give us the indication of the direction. Let's look at the former president of
just 1 second on that one, Mr. Kunu, because we really do need to, if you can hear me, just 1 second, if you can hear me, we need to go. But just to be clear, you said everything rises and falls on leadership. Now, it's not just one person from what you've said, it's a whole load of people. So it speaks to, first of all, what should be the core. The individual is, the leader is, yes, I hear you. But then what's the direction? Is there a national vision? Is there a national ethos that everyone in leadership has to answer to, as opposed to depending on just one person's body language?
Good. That is very correct also. Now, having come to terms with the fact that there's somebody who is at the center of the leadership, the people also have a role to play to ensure that the person who represents them at a subnational level, aligns with something that is general to positivity in respect of political representation, as in the context of this conversation. So when you have governors, for instance, who perhaps are from different parties and they do not model their style of leadership after what perhaps the person at the center is doing, then you're going to have disparity of outcomes. And that is where the problem is. So you cannot take away from a central vision that becomes the tracking path for every other person that comes on board with regard to moving the country in this instance forward. So the expectation placed, at the foot of the person who is at the center is also the same expectation for those at the subnational level. And that is why for everybody, for instance, who is a minister with this administration, it is key for them to know that whatever it is that the person does, who is the number one man, they will also be looking to see how much of that is assessed in their performances. I had said it on one of the platforms I was, that's about a week ago, that you cannot take away the role, for instance, of civil servants and those within the organized private sector from the accumulation of the aggregate of success that is expected of anybody who occupies any position in government or outside government. So it therefore means that for us, the national vision and the consciousness of being patriotic in moving the country forward, one way or the other becomes the mantra for everybody to follow. We're talking about Singapore the last time. What did Lee Kuan Yew do?
Mr.
Do you know that even in
Singapore,
you cannot even put your spittle on the road? It's because there's an embodiment of rightness.
There's a lot that has been said, Mr. Kuno, and that example has been cited quite a number of times, and a number of people have also cited even Japan and China and a number of other places. But the question is, where do we get that national ethos from, and when? Unfortunately, that question can't be answered at this time. Thank you so much for your time. Adeni Kuno.
I want to say thank you too for having me. Thank you too. Thank you. I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
So we take a break. When we return, Business Morning on Sunrise Daily is next.